The boardroom was silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence, but the heavy, suffocating kind, the kind that presses down on everyone's chest. At the far end of the long glass table, Sarah's knuckles tightened around her pen. Her confident smile, the one she wore like armor every single day, was gone. Her eyes darted to the man standing at the head of the table. The janitor. Mr. Henderson. The same man she had rolled her eyes at. The same man she had brushed past without so much as a thank you. Only now he was not holding a mop. He was holding the attention of the most powerful people in the building, the CEO, the board members, the investors. And they were looking at him with respect. The voice of the narrator cuts in, low and deliberate. She thought he was just a man in a dirty uniform, until the truth shattered everything she believed. Images flash in Sarah's mind like lightning. Mr. Henderson pushing a squeaky cleaning cart down the hallway. Mr. Henderson shaking hands with world leaders in black and white photographs. Mr. Henderson's name etched in bold on technical blueprints. Sarah's chest tightened. Nothing made sense. The man who once scrubbed coffee stains from the breakroom floor was now speaking as if the future of the company rested in his hands. And maybe, just maybe, it did. The question burned in her mind and in the mind of everyone in the room. Who was this man really? The day had begun the way it always did. The hum of computers. The low murmur of early morning greetings. The faint aroma of burnt coffee drifting from the breakroom. Sarah slipped through the glass doors of Kingsley Technologies at precisely 8:45 a.m. Punctual, polished, and prepared, at least in her own eyes. She had been with the company for just under 3 months, but she carried herself as if she had already earned a permanent seat at the decision-maker's table. Her heels clicked confidently across the marble floor, her tailored blazer hugged her shoulders perfectly, and the expensive perfume she wore lingered just a moment too long in the air. On the surface, Sarah was everything a modern corporate success story was supposed to look like: driven, ambitious, and sharply intelligent. But under that polished exterior was something else. A quiet, constant belief that some people simply didn't matter as much as others. Just beyond the reception desk, a man in a faded navy uniform pushed a cleaning cart along the hallway. His back was slightly stooped, his hair peppered with silver, his hands worn but steady. Mr. Henderson. The janitor. He worked quietly, methodically, his movements efficient, almost rhythmic. There was a care to the way he wiped down the glass doors as if every streak mattered. He paused occasionally to straighten a rug or align a stack of magazines in the lobby. "Morning," he said warmly as Sarah passed. She offered him nothing more than a brief glance and a tight smile, the kind reserved for strangers you have no interest in knowing. Inside her mind, a small voice whispered the kind of thought she'd never say out loud. Shouldn't he be invisible? That's the point of janitors, isn't it? To do their job without getting in the way? In the office, Mr. Henderson was known but not known. People nodded politely as he passed but rarely stopped to talk. He was part of the background, as permanent as the potted plants in the corner. Sarah noticed it, and in her mind it seemed normal. The executives mingled with other executives. The marketing team chatted with IT. The janitor cleaned. The lines were drawn without anyone needing to say a word. One Tuesday morning, as Sarah refilled her coffee, Henderson entered the break room carrying a mop bucket. "Careful there," he said, gesturing toward a small spill near the counter. "Don't want you slipping before your big meeting." Sarah looked down at the spill, then back at him, her lips curling into a smirk. "Thanks. I'll try not to trip over your bucket." The words were sharp, meant to be playful at least in her mind, but they carried an edge. Henderson didn't flinch. He simply nodded and began mopping. Day after day, Henderson went about his work with the same quiet diligence. He arrived before most people, ensuring the building was spotless before the first shift started. He polished the boardroom table until it gleamed. He changed light bulbs no one else noticed were flickering. He picked up forgotten receipts from under the vending machines. He never rushed, but he never wasted time. Every task was done with precision, as though the smallest detail mattered just as much as the biggest presentation. And yet, despite his effort, his presence was often met with the same dismissive glances from Sarah, sometimes a raised eyebrow, sometimes a polite but hollow hello, that meant nothing. There were the little interactions that revealed the gap between them. One afternoon, Henderson held the door for Sarah as she carried a stack of documents. She breezed past without meeting his eyes, muttering a quick, distracted thanks before diving back into her phone. Another time, she and 2 colleagues passed him in the hall. Henderson was kneeling, replacing a ceiling tile after fixing a leak. One of Sarah's co-workers gave him a friendly nod. Sarah, without thinking, leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "Does he ever take a day off?" It was meant as a joke. It landed as a sneer. Henderson heard it. He didn't react. If Sarah noticed anything about him, it was that he never seemed rattled. Not by the overflowing trash cans, not by the printer jam that left paper scattered across the floor, not even by the occasional unkind remark. When spoken to rudely, he responded with the same steady calm as when someone thanked him. It wasn't indifference. It was something else, a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and not needing anyone's validation. But Sarah didn't see that. Not yet. For her, Mr. Henderson was just part of the scenery, the man in the dirty uniform who mopped floors while she worked on important things. And she had no idea just how wrong she was. The morning air in the office buzzed with nervous energy. Today was not just another day. Today, the executives of Kingsley Technologies were hosting one of their most important clients, a multinational firm with the power to secure a contract worth tens of millions. The boardroom was prepped like a stage before curtain call. Polished glass table. Sleek black chairs aligned perfectly. A projection screen stood ready, displaying the company's logo in bold white letters. Sarah had been given a prominent role in the presentation. It was her chance to prove she could play in the big leagues. Her blazer was crisp, her hair perfectly arranged, her confidence radiating. 5 minutes before the meeting, a murmur rose from the IT station. The presentation file, the one containing weeks of data, visuals, and carefully calculated projections, was nowhere to be found. Not in the shared drive. Not on the backup USB. Gone. Sarah's stomach tightened. She hurried over to the conference laptop, clicking frantically through folders. This doesn't make sense, she muttered, her voice shaking just slightly. Her colleague leaned in, whispering, "If we don't fix this, we're done." Someone from IT rushed in, explaining that the file had likely been corrupted during last night's server update. The only possible solution? Rebuild the presentation from a raw database file, if they could even access it in time. The clients were already in the lobby. The CEO's assistant poked her head into the room, her tone sharp. 3 minutes. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She pulled out her own laptop, connecting it to the projector. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she tried to rebuild the presentation manually, graphs without labels, slides without proper formatting. The more she rushed, the more mistakes appeared. Data mismatched. Images pixelated. The animations broke completely. Her voice rose, snapping at a junior analyst who dared to point out a missing figure. "Just let me handle it." Amid the flurry of panic, a familiar sound drifted in, the soft squeak of wheels on tile. Mr. Henderson pushed his cleaning cart past the open boardroom door. He paused, leaning slightly against the doorway, his eyes scanning the chaos. "Something wrong?" he asked, his tone almost casual. Sarah barely looked up. "Just keep moving, please. This isn't your concern." Henderson didn't leave. Instead, he stepped inside, gaze settling on the frozen laptop screen. "Your system's reading an index error," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's not lost, it's just misreferenced in the directory." Sarah's brow furrowed. "What are you even talking about?" she scoffed. But a few people glanced at each other, his words sounded technical. Too technical for a janitor. "You have about 90 seconds before you're on," Henderson continued, his voice calm, measured. "If you let me, I can restore it." Sarah let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You? No offense, but this is a multi-million-dollar presentation, not fixing a vacuum cleaner." One of the senior engineers, standing nearby, hesitated. "What exactly would you do?" Henderson stepped forward, eyes scanning the setup. "Bypass the front-end load call and access the root path manually. The backup process leaves a shadow index in the admin directory. If the data's intact, I can reling the assets in under a minute." Silence. Not the silence of dismissal this time, but of curiosity. The engineer spoke again. "We don't have a better plan." Without waiting for formal approval, Henderson set his cleaning cart aside and moved to the laptop. His hands, steady and sure, navigated through the system with a speed that suggested decades of familiarity. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. Commands flashed and disappeared. Sarah hovered nearby, arms crossed, still unconvinced but unable to look away. In less than 45 seconds, the projector flickered. The missing presentation bloomed onto the screen in perfect order, every chart, every animation flawless. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Henderson stepped back, wiping his hands lightly on his uniform. "Should run fine now," he said simply, as though he had just changed a light bulb. The engineer's voice was low. "That was impressive." Sarah swallowed hard. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in her throat. As he picked up his cart, Henderson muttered, almost under his breath, "Didn't think they'd still be using that old directory architecture. I designed it 20 years ago. Most of the room didn't catch it. But Sarah did. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she understood the man she thought she had figured out." The door to the boardroom swung open, and the CEO stepped inside, his presence instantly commanding the attention of everyone in the room. His eyes swept over the space, lingering for a moment on the perfectly restored presentation glowing on the screen. Then his gaze found Henderson, and a smile spread across his face, genuine, warm, and filled with recognition. "Good to see you, Mr. Henderson," he said, walking forward and extending his hand with respect that seemed almost reverent. Sarah froze. The words didn't register at first, like a puzzle she couldn't quite fit together. The CEO didn't speak to the janitors like that. In fact, the CEO barely acknowledged most people in the building. But here he was, shaking hands with the man who pushed a mop cart through the hallways. "You still keeping this place running better than the day we opened?" the CEO asked with a grin. Henderson chuckled softly. "I do what I can." There was an easy familiarity between them, the kind that spoke of years of shared history. And then, without any theatrics, the CEO turned to the stunned room. "For those of you who don't know, this is David Henderson, co-founder of Kingsley Technologies, chief engineer of our original product line. The man who built the systems this company still relies on today." The words hit Sarah like a blow. Co-founder? Chief engineer? Billion-dollar systems? Her mind scrambled for a memory of him fitting that description, but all she could summon were images of him pushing a broom, wiping down windows, hauling trash bags. The dissonance between the man she thought she knew and the truth unfolding in front of her was dizzying. Fragments of Henderson's past came to life in her mind's eye as if someone had pulled back a curtain. A younger Henderson hunched over a drafting table, sketching designs late into the night under the glow of a single lamp. Henderson in a tailored suit, shaking hands with partners over a major contract that would launch the company into the global market. Henderson in front of a camera, politely declining interviews, choosing privacy over fame. And then years later, slipping quietly into a Navy uniform, content to work in the background while others took the spotlight. The CEO continued, telling the room how Henderson had sold his shares years ago for a fortune that would last 10 lifetimes, but refused to disappear entirely. Instead, he chose to stay on, not in an office with a title, but in the corridors and workrooms, where the heart of the company beat strongest. He wanted to be close to the people who make this place run, the CEO said. Not the executives, not the board members. The real backbone, the people who show up every day and put in the work. Sarah's chest tightened. Every smirk, every dismissive glance, every careless remark she had made now echoed back at her with crushing weight. She had mocked the very man whose vision had made her job possible, whose intellect had built the system she depended on, whose humility outshone any award or title. The realization was like standing in front of a mirror she could no longer look away from. Henderson glanced at her briefly, his eyes calm, unreadable, before turning his attention back to the CEO. There was no smugness in his face, no trace of pride in having caught her in her own arrogance. If anything, there was kindness that made the shame burn even deeper. Sarah lowered her gaze, the truth settling heavy in her chest. Her pride wasn't just cracked. It had collapsed entirely. The news of Henderson's true identity spread through the building faster than any company memo ever could. By the next morning, the energy in the office felt different. People who had once passed him with polite nods now stopped to greet him warmly, some even lingering to talk. A few of the engineers shook his hand, their faces lit with admiration, as though meeting a living legend they had only read about in company archives. Even the executives, usually insulated in their own circles, made a point to acknowledge him with genuine respect. Sarah noticed it all from a distance. She avoided the break room when he was there, kept her head down during meetings, and steered conversations away from anything that might bring his name up. She was painfully aware of how her earlier treatment of him contrasted with the way her colleagues now spoke to him. Their voices carried words like brilliant and visionary, words she had never once considered in connection to the man she had dismissed as background noise. Later that week, the CEO invited Henderson to address the entire office during the Friday town hall. The conference room was packed, and even those who couldn't find a seat stood along the walls. Henderson walked to the front, not with the posture of someone seeking the spotlight, but with the steady ease of a man comfortable in his own skin. He rested his hands on the podium and looked around the room before speaking. "I've worked in this building in more ways than most people here realize," he began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. I've sat in meetings that shaped our future and I've mopped floors when the lights were out. What I've learned is simple. Titles fade, appearances deceive, but character always shines through. The room was silent, every ear tuned to his words. You'll meet people in life who look like they have nothing to offer you, he continued. Sometimes they'll be the very ones who teach you the lessons you'll never forget. So I ask you, never underestimate anyone. Not the person beside you, not the person behind you, and certainly not the person you think is beneath you. A ripple of quiet reflection seemed to pass over the room. Even Sarah felt it, the truth in his words settling into a place she could no longer ignore. When the meeting ended and the crowd dispersed, Sarah lingered in the back, debating whether she should leave without saying anything. But something in her wouldn't let her walk away. She waited until the last few people had left and then slowly approached him. He looked up as she neared, his expression as calm as ever. "Mr. Henderson, she hesitated, her throat tightening. "I owe you an apology. For the way I've treated you. I was wrong." Henderson studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "We all have lessons to learn," he said gently. "What matters is what we do next." The words didn't erase her guilt, but they offered something else, a chance. A chance to do better, to be better. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded back. "Then I'll make sure the next thing I do is different." Henderson smiled faintly, then returned to his work as if the conversation had been nothing extraordinary. But for Sarah, it was a turning point she would carry for the rest of her life. Months passed, and the memory of Henderson's revelation became more than just an office story, it became part of the company's culture. Sarah had changed in ways her colleagues quietly noticed. She no longer walked past the cleaning staff without a warm greeting. She remembered people's names, asked about their families, and meant it when she listened to the answers. She spoke to interns with the same attentiveness she once reserved for executives. Her old habit of measuring worth by titles had dissolved into something better, a genuine curiosity and respect for everyone she encountered. The ripple effect spread. Departments began breaking down invisible walls. Engineers sat with the maintenance crew during lunch. Executives invited receptionists to brainstorming sessions. Even small gestures, like including the janitorial staff in holiday photos or publicly acknowledging their work during meetings, became the norm. There was a lightness in the building now, a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. One quiet Friday morning, an email went out to the entire staff. "Today we celebrate David Henderson's final day with us." By noon, the lobby was filled with employees from every level of the company. Henderson stood near the reception desk, his uniform freshly pressed, his hands folded loosely in front of him. The CEO gave a short speech, thanking him for decades of service, both seen and unseen. Then, with a small flourish, he unveiled a bronze plaque mounted on the wall. It read, "Every person matters, every role counts." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of Henderson's entire life philosophy. As the applause filled the room, Sarah found herself clapping not just out of respect, but out of gratitude for the lesson she hadn't known she needed. Weeks later, Sarah sat across from a nervous new hire in the same conference room where she had once been so eager to prove herself. The young woman fidgeted with her pen, clearly intimidated by the new environment. Sarah smiled reassuringly. "I want you to remember something," she said. "Everyone here has a story you don't know. Treat them like they matter because they do." As the trainee nodded, Sarah's mind drifted back to the image of Henderson in his faded navy uniform, the day she first met him and the day she truly saw him. A quiet smile formed on her lips. True wealth, she had learned, was not in the titles we hold or the money we earn, but in the lives we touch with respect and humility. And that, she knew, was the kind of legacy worth leaving behind.